Hey folks, time to talk about something that I know a lot of you are really excited about, the new Nikon ZFC. Now, before we get into this, I have to say from the outset, I know that polarizing opinions are what get the most clicks. Best camera ever, worst camera ever, terrible, monstrous, fantastic. That's not what I'm about. I am a Nikon shooter. I have been with the brand for decades, but I'm not a blind fanboy who's just going to paint a rosy picture if I find problems. So all I can promise to do in this video is not to make wild claims in either direction, but point out the good and the bad that I think about this camera from my personal perspective, and I'll leave it up to you to decide if it's going to fit your needs. I'm not a camera salesman, I'm a photographer, and I'm happy to share my thoughts on this gear. Now, this actually isn't the new ZFC. This is the Nikon FM2, which is not exactly new. This is the ZFC, and it was modeled off the FM2. So I'm sure you can see the similarity straight off the bat between these two, and you can see that they're not identical. And I think that's a really important place to start on a video like this, is that there'll be people, and there'll always be this split, who wish it had been perfectly faithful to the original, even maybe just wanted a remake of the film edition. There'll be those who wanted it to be super faithful, all the knobs and dials matching, everything fully in steel, no compromises, no screens, no video, all of that to keep it as close as possible. And then there'll be the others who wanted it to be as modern as possible with just a nod to the past. And then everyone else will be somewhere in the middle. The fact of the matter is, and I'm not apologizing for Nikon for this, I haven't even shot with the camera yet, this is just an observation. No camera can satisfy all the wants of all the shooters. I would even say that no camera can satisfy 100% of the wants of a single shooter. As much as I love shooting with my Nikon Z7 II, it's actually what these macro shots here are being shot on, I don't wish that it had an articulating screen, and I'm not thrilled with the high ISO performance. Nothing is just black and white, perfect, or garbage. But from what I've seen, I think they're walking the right kind of balance between new and old on this. Now, just to get a bit more of a perspective here, here's the other guy that we should be thinking about in this scenario. This is the Nikon Z50, and it is, you know, the other APS-C camera closest to the ZFC in terms of specs and price that's worth having here in the mix. Now, let's just put the ZFC in the middle, seeing he's the star of the show. Now, I want to run through and give you a top view here on the equipment, my thoughts on the build quality and the ergonomics just here in studio. I do plan to go out and take a quick little shot with it this evening. I'll share a couple of sample files a bit later in the video. But this weekend, I have a big series of shoots planned, or I have a block of time set aside to test the ZFC in detail. So I have put a Google form over on my website at mattgranger.com where you can tell me what you would like to see tested with this guy, and I'll do my best to cover off the most requested topics. Whilst you're there, of course, you can sign up to the mailing list and all of that good stuff. But let's first of all take a look around the ZFC and the FM2 and see how they compare in terms of body and design and shape and size and all of that good stuff. Now, again, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing. I'm not shitting on Nikon. I'm not criticizing what it should have been. I'm just here to tell you what is. I do think the look of them is pretty great, the way that it is a nod to the past, but something that I want to point out, well, two things. First of all, the negative. No, of course, it doesn't really feel like the old one. It's significantly lighter, and whilst the finish is metallized, or it may even be a metal sheath over the top of all of these surfaces, underneath it, undeniably, it's plasticky. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Z50 is plasticky. The Nikon Z7 II has plasticky elements as well. If it were made like this, out of all steel, it would be significantly heavier. And that's something that we kind of relish when we're shooting with old manual gear. Wow, it's so heavy and feels so reliable. But if it were new and so damn heavy, I don't think that people would actually want it to be like that. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that there's a funny thing with photographers where so many people are like, oh, I don't give a crap about the style or the aesthetics, it's just about does it do the job? Which one, I think is dishonest. Whether you're conscious of it and actively thinking about it, we do all think about style. I chose this shirt because I think it looks nice. I wear this watch because I think it looks nice. You bought your car in that color versus that color, or chose to wear those pants to work instead of those pants to work, because to some degree you think they look better than the alternative. So it does factor in, at least in some degree. But the point I want to make is the retro styling on this isn't just about style. If you've never shot with an FM2 or a film camera and you could give a crap about the layout, what you really want to be thinking about is, does having the manual, auto, shutter speed, program mode, and all of your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO out there on dials rather than in menus or unlabeled, does that work for you? Does having all of these things there, tactile, vibe for you or not? Would you rather have it hidden away? And other things like this rear flippy screen, I understand whose Nikon's target market is for this, so it makes sense for them. But calling this a vlogger screen puts old fuddy-duddies like me, who actually owned and shot with FM2s in the past, completely off, because the idea of walking around like this, if I weren't doing it for YouTube, feels completely obnoxious. However, this has great practical applications. I was just going through an edit of a shoot I did with Megan in LA last month, and there were some shoots where I was shooting portrait oriented down low to the ground, and having a screen that I couldn't tilt up like this to be able to see or show my work to the team, and they all had to sit down and then turn their head. It was a real pain in the butt. And if you're shooting close to the ground, having a screen like that that lets you look at it from any angle is great. It's not just about Narcissus walking around always trying to have yourself in the frame. There are practical applications to a lot of this layout, so don't get hung up on I'm not into retro so it's not for me, or I am into retro so it is for me. Think about the actual layout and placement and functions and specifications of the camera and see if it suits your needs. Now, in terms of features and specifications, if we compare it to the Z50, essentially they're kind of the same. It looks like the new guy has better autofocus in video, slightly better autofocus in low light, as it will also let you go to 30 minutes in manual shutter speed priority rather than just the 60 seconds or whatever it is on the Z50. Of course, the fully articulating screen is one thing, but the Z50 actually has a 3.2 inch, whereas this is a 3-inch screen. And the only thing that really stands the Z50 ahead of the ZFC in terms of its specifications is that it has a built-in pop-up flash, and the ZFC doesn't. Just like the FM2 didn't, and the Z7 II doesn't, and the Z6 II, and the da-da-da-da-da. So many modern cameras don't. But if you value having a pop-up flash, which by the way is for more than making your photos look terrible, it's great for triggering external flashes. It can be useful for getting a little bit of fill light in backlit situations when you're shooting flowers or something. And, you know, there are ways, of course, to balance your light between scenes to make it look natural. It does have some positive advantages, but adding one into here, I think, would have destroyed the aesthetic, and they were really trying to keep this traditional shaped pentaprism on the ZFC to match the FM2. The other thing, of course, is the price. The Z50 is almost 2 years older than the ZFC, even though they're keeping basically the same hardware inside. They're now available for about $100 cheaper new, but there are also some on the used and refurbished market that you could pick up even cheaper if you're going to go down that route. Now, As I said, this is going to be an overview on the cameras, not a full review. I am going to go and do exhaustive, well, not exhaustive, but extensive testing on it over the weekend. Please do let me know what you'd like to see. Please leave it in the Google form so I can refer to it on the weekend rather than just leaving it as a comment here. Of course, love to get your comments here though. But a couple of other things that I want to think about in terms of the ZFC. One is that it's using the Z mount. Now, for better or worse, that's what it has. So it's not like some APS-C systems where they then have a different mount or a small amount that, or a system where they will take their own series of lenses exclusively. It means a couple of things. So this is their new 28mm f2.8 lens that actually will then become a 42mm because of the crop factor. So in a way, it's sacrificing that you can't get super small lenses because it's using that gigantic mount. But on the other hand, you have access to all of their fantastic Z glass, which on the other hand is then going to throw into question the ergonomics. The Z50 has the chunky grip, so throwing a 24-70 2.8 or a 50mm prime on here that's big and chunky doesn't throw off the balance too badly. But is it going to with the ZFC that basically has no grip? Once I put the 50mm f1.2 on this, it may be a little ridiculous. Let me actually show you that. Well, here we go. For example, there's the 51.2. Here's also the 105 f1.4, the new 50mm macro. So there you get an idea of how the 51.2 fits on the Z7 Mark II. It's still a big lens, but with the grip, it really works. Whereas putting it onto the ZFC, it's slightly a different proposition. Now let's take a look at the FM2 and its 50mm 1.4 versus the Nikon ZFC with the 51.2. Slightly a different kind of ballpark when you look at it in this regard, huh? Just a little bit different in terms of size and scale. Now, of course, when you're using a big lens, this is what I found when I was shooting with Zeiss Otis lenses. With a big lens, you just take the weight of the whole system on the lens, and then the second hand is basically just supporting the camera. So not a big deal. But with something, more regular, like a 24-70, where you need to be zooming and whatnot, it could actually become an issue. So let's check that out. And now, just for the flip side once again, the good thing about using a full frame lens on a crop censored camera is that every lens, no matter how fantastic it is, the edges tend to be softer, less contrast, more vignetting, more likely to flare, all of those things. On a crop camera, you're only using the central part of the lens, which is the sharpest and best part. So this will no longer give us a 50mm field of view, it's going to be a 75, but we're going to have the best that this lens has to offer. So it should be really fun to test out some primo glass on this crop censored camera. Now, of course, you can also use all of your manual lenses via adapter onto this. They don't all give full autofocus, but then the FM2 didn't either. Now, just thinking a little bit where this sits in the market, I've seen in forums people saying that this is a Fuji knockoff. Let's be clear, Fuji make fantastic cameras and they do have a retro feel to them, and they have great dials and tactile feel to them. They definitely have a dominant place in that overall space. Something interesting that I've found often anecdotally, that Nikon DSLR shooters often went to Fuji or had Fuji as their APS-C second kit, whereas more Canon shooters went to Sony. So that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how Nikon users now consider this versus their Fuji options. But keep in mind, the Z50 has just about the best ISO performance of any APS-C camera sensor ever made, and now it's in here. Shame that it hasn't had an upgrade in almost 2 years, but still, it's a phenomenal sensor. So with the slightly better autofocus and the better shutter speed and a few little bits and pieces and the better screen, is this going to be then kind of the best performing sub $1,000 APS-C camera out there? I don't know. Again, it's going to come down to you. I'm really looking forward to getting out and testing these out. This FM2, I'm really pumped to have been able to get in just to show you a little bit on. This is actually practically brand new, like new old stock. Opening this guy up, it still has the plastic guard in there for the film. It really is pristine and unmarked. I guess Nikon saves a bunch of these at the factory from each model that goes out, and now that they have a camera based on it, it's worth getting some out and sending around the world to be able to check out. Back to the point about Fuji owning this space, keep in mind years ago, Nikon did release the Nikon DF, which was based around, I think it was the D4 or the D4S sensor at the time, the best ISO performer ever. And the DF performed even better. However, it brought down some of the capabilities in terms of shutter speed and sync speed, which meant it wasn't a long-term user for me. But I can tell you off the bat, this has the same kind of appeal in terms of the layout and for anyone who likes the retro side of things with a better screen, and it's significantly smaller. The DF was a lot bigger than this. I'll see if I can find a side-by-side picture online to show you guys here. The only thing is that it did have a little bump there for ergonomics. So it'll be interesting to see how this one holds up once we're out in the field using the 28mm as well as some full frame, and I have a couple of their APS-C lenses to compare as well. So as I said, I am planning to get out and shoot with this guy this evening to have a little bit of time on the street. We're going out for dinner, so I'll just take it along and get a few little shots, a little B-roll and whatnot. Roll tape. So brace yourself, folks, for probably the most boring sample photos I've ever shared. It was literally 10 minutes of shooting before and after dinner. Still better to get something rather than nothing. Keep in mind this is a brand new camera, not even available for sale yet, so the RAWs aren't decodable. These are all based off the JPEGs, but I do have the RAWs saved and I'll share them with you once the decoder is available. Even in this little 10-minute shooting, there was a genuine situation where being able to use the tilting screen was really handy to get this vantage point up on the sign, and later to get these shots of the puppy down low to the ground. It's hardly inspiring, but I did do a motion tracking using eye detect here at f1.2 and it stayed with the guy. So as I said, fairly boring test photos, but you can guide what I'll include in my full review that I'm shooting in a couple of days' time. Make sure you check the questionnaire in the description below. You know what? I haven't even shot the photos yet as I film this, but I'm gonna let you download some of them. This is, after all, a final production unit. I'll put them on the same page as the questionnaire where you can tell me what you want to see fully tested with this guy over at my website. If you haven't already, please do make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and turn on the notifications. That's not a vanity thing. The number doesn't get me all excited, but it really does help with findability, and it helps me get access to more equipment so I can present it to you guys. And if you're not already following, I have a couple of Instagram accounts. I'll pop links below. The main one is just _Matt Granger. Hope you found that useful. Look forward to hearing what you want to see tested on this guy, and I'll see you really soon. See ya.